Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
I'm Jena Brown.
I'm J. Kevin Tumlinson.
And I'm JD Barker. Welcome to Writers Inc. So first off, it looks like all four of us are going to Author Nation, right? We just kind of voted and decided, and Jena lives there, so she's there by default.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I was planning on coming down to the casino and just stalking you.
Hanging out at your typical slot machine. Do you have like your own machine at the Horseshoe?
I do. Yeah. And when you're a local here, they actually give you one like as you become a resident. So like they just assign you a slot machine at a random casino, and that's how it works.
Do you have a special ashtray with your initials on it? A little oxygen tank?
Right. Yeah.
I'm going to be there giving a talk about indie trad and hybrid. That's the full load of my responsibility. The rest of the time is hopefully going to be fun.
Yeah.
I am not entirely certain what the hell I'm doing at Author Nation. Apparently I am interviewing a lot of people, and I think I'm being kind of like a host MC kind of thing.
Perfect.
So, yeah. I may be talking. I don't know what's happening. I have no idea what's happening. I'm just like
We'll do something fun though.
Yeah.
We'll get something fun together.
That's the typical Vegas experience. So I feel like that's pretty like on target.
Yeah. It feels very Vegas to me. So I'm looking forward to it. Joe's good. He's there setting something up pretty wild, man. I'm looking forward to seeing how it all plays out. So first year.
Sounds like it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
I had something that kind of like a side hustle that sort of dropped into my lap the last couple of months. I just wanted to bring it up on the air. So with Behind a Closed Door, I published the print and everything through Simon & Schuster. I did the cover through 99 Designs. And typically, I'm in about 150 different countries. I've got 20 some publishers around the world, and they typically create their own covers for books. But with this one, a lot of them wanted to use the same cover that I had created here in the US. And I actually licensed it back to them. I didn't realize that this was a thing. Not for huge dollars, but between $500 and $1,000 for each publisher, which more than covered what I paid to have it done in the first place. So I'm trying to figure out what all this means. Either they really like the cover, which I guess is one possibility, or they're trying to streamline on their side and not have to create covers anymore, which is another thing. So I'm not quite sure where it's going, but if this is a trend, I like it.
I wonder if it's kind of looping back to what we talked about last time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I wonder if it's that social media.
Let's not tell the listeners what that was.
So you got to go back and listen to that. That could very well be it, though. That makes sense because, the covers for me, like if you pull them up, like they're very different in every country, but like they're themed, So if I look at my covers in Bulgaria, they all look the same. The ones in Spanish all look the same. They always have that kind of feel. So like by doing this, it's a very different cover than what they've used before. But yeah, I think you might be right. So yeah, for anybody who didn't hear that, you may want to go back and just listen to what we discussed. Because
the guys that are doing all my German titles, always create new covers, and I like some of them quite a lot. But the other thing that they do, JD, and you'll have to tell me if this happens to you, but some of the titles they actually change to something else.
That happens to me all the time.
I've seen that.
And in some places, I'm not JD Barker, I'm Jonathan Barker, which always throws me because like nobody calls me Jonathan or Johnny or anything like that. It's always been JD.
Why would they do that? That's weird.
I don't know, but like the first place I noticed it was Bulgaria, and because of the way it's written, like I didn't realize that my name wasn't in my actual name until they got like 4 or 5 books in, and now at this point, like I'm known as Jonathan Barker there, so that's just who I need to be when I go to Bulgaria, and it's not the only. There's a few countries where they did that, and I don't know if it's because they just didn't like the initials or what, but yeah, I'm Jonathan Barker in a couple of different places.
See, my Bulgarian titles are under JD Barker, which is
there you go.
I also thought was weird.
Maybe that's why you were already there.
Yeah, you get one name per country.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Writers Guild or the Actors Guild or whatever, right? Yeah.
Right, exactly. I mean, like I like it. It makes it very easy to keep track of people. Only one person can have that name ever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's not how it works, though. We know.
Oh,
that's why there's several Stephen Kings on Amazon. If you look, that sort of thing. Somebody gonna sue somebody. Do we want to dive into news now? Or we?
Yeah. I was just thinking that through. What's going on in the news?
Let's say that. So Barnes & Noble to purchase Tattered cover for $1.83 million. Barnes & Noble is set to buy Tattered Cover Bookstore for $1.8 million in cash. The deal was accepted by Tattered Cover's owner and is pending approval from bankruptcy court, expected before July 31st. Barnes & Noble will acquire Tattered Cover's inventory in 5 locations, which will continue operating under the Tattered Cover Bookstore name. That's good to hear. The sale will leave almost no proceeds to cover the nearly $3.5 million in unsecured claims, with approximately $1.6 million of these claims from publishers. Very sad. Tattered Covers has been around for forever, so it's kind of sad to see them going under. And especially with this deal seems sort of, I don't know, it seems like they're taking advantage. You tell me.
Oh, they are.
They were the highest bid. There were a few offers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really?
That's
So, I mean, I don't know. That's a tough one. Like, I mean, why didn't anyone else offer more? I mean, and I guess maybe the money they can't, but I don't know.
I wonder if it has to do with the debt, though. And like, what does that mean? It always makes me a little sad when people are not getting their money, publishers, when things like that hurt,
Right.
especially with all the restructuring and cuts we've been seeing.
So I'm a writer and not a mathematician, but does that mean that they were like almost $5 million in debt at the time of the sale? Is that is that why they went bankrupt?
They're very close to shuttering their doors
3.5.
if something like this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And honestly, even on the debt side,
Yeah.
it's going to be very difficult, I think, for some of these people to collect, because now they're up against this behemoth known as Barnes and Noble. It's a lot different if it's a mom and pop shop that picks it up and they're fighting on even ground. But Barnes and Noble can say, we saved this company, we'll give you 10 cents on the dollar to settle up. I don't know if they actually followed through on the bankruptcy. If they did, then that changes all that too. They may not have to pay any of it.
This could very well be just a deal for the inventory and the brand, and not any of the unsecured notes. Because
did they go through with the bankruptcy? Did they get that far?
I don't know. I know there's court involved for bankruptcy, but
I think that they did actually, or they're in that process, which is why they had to actually get approval from the court for it, because it meant selling off a piece of it rather than settling the entirety of the debt. And that may be another reason why they only got 1.8 million, because that kept them from, like, that. It was basically it was nothing. They're just trading it in order to keep the brand alive. They're not gaining, the owners aren't gaining anything out of it. So they're probably, and if I were the people who were owed this money, I mean, 1.8, that's going to cover some of it. Who knows? They had to have cut a deal.
Have any of you actually been to Tattered Books?
I've been to one Tattered Books, but I can't remember where.
What is it like in relation to a Barnes and Noble? Is it a smaller store?
Yeah, a little. Felt pretty similar to me.
I'm wondering if Barnes and Noble sees this as an experiment, and that's why they're not changing the name. Like if they're going to try and open up a slightly different floor plan or different model of a bookstore to see if it takes.
Well, it does have like some brand recognition and then kind of cachet on that front. So, and since Barnes and Noble's been really leaning in on the kind of like building in the indie bookstore feel, Tattered Cover always had that. So, it just kind of fits. It's a good piece. It feels a little bit like charity, doesn't it? It feels a little bit, I mean, I know I said they are taking advantage of them, but it feels a little bit like somebody said, we can't let this iconic brand go under. We got to do something to keep it and profit at the same time.
That wouldn't happen though, because Barnes and Noble is, I forget the firm that has them, but it's a private equity company, right? That owns them. Like,
they don't do charity.
They don't do charity. No. But I can see them making an experiment, like picking up a store that's got a smaller footprint, a smaller cost to operate, a slightly different business model, because now they've got two different things they can play with. And if they want to expand, maybe this market makes more sense for another Tattered Books, while this market makes more sense for a Barnes and Noble. It gives them some more options.
All right. Well, I'm back to thinking that they're predatory vultures.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, didn't they buy like another indie company in the South somewhere and kept the name of it? I wonder if just with like the indie bookstore movement, it's been, surging in the last couple of years by indie. If they're looking to keep storefronts that look indie that maybe people don't know are actually Barnes and Noble, that would just be. My thought.
I mean, it's an industry thing. I mean, I don't know that they've done it like necessarily with bookstores, but you see it all the time, and like financial institutions will do that. They'll come in, they'll buy up a small chain that does really well in like, Oregon and keep the name even though they're no longer owned by those. Convenience stores do it all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it is something that happens quite a lot. I just don't know that it's happened with bookstores.
Bookstores. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Moving on from Tattered cover. We hope they do well.
Get your drinks ready.
Get your drinks ready. Yeah, I actually do. I kind of need a drink right now. Now you can read the classics with AI drink powered expert guides. Authors like Margaret Atwood, John Banville, and Roxane Gay have collaborated with Rebind Publishing to turn their voices and commentary into AI chatbots. Users can engage with texts such as The Age of Innocence by Roxane Gay, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Marlon James, and Dubliners by John Banville, among others. The AI-powered commentaries aim to provide a modern take on classic literature, enhancing reader engagement. The project plans to cover 100 classics. The app, launching on June 17th, will offer free access initially with a subscription model to follow. I'll be your Huckleberry.
Oh boy. I mean, I'm a huge Charles Dickens fan. It'll be cool to sit down and be able to talk to Chuck about one of the books when the AI Chuck comes out. But yeah, I don't know how I feel.
I was just surprised, like John Banville and Margaret Atwood giving their voices to AI. Like, I don't know why that surprised me.
Yeah, especially Margaret Atwood. That one does take me a little by surprise. She seems like someone who would be opposed to that, but who knows? Fun.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I will say it does make sense from like a psychological perspective as an author who's getting older. And I mean, yes, your works are out there, but you do start thinking about like legacy and being able to have a unique interaction with her books may have been too tempting to walk away from, but I don't hate this use of AI. I do think it's interesting. I just, hope that they're not, and they'll use it to train other things and to do other nefarious things. But it would be nice to think in a world that it would just be for this particular niche content that would be very interesting for fans and readers and not used for anything else.
I think we're going to see a lot more of this. I mean, totally different subject or thing. John Bon Jovi just opened a restaurant in Tennessee, I think in Nashville. And when you walk in, there's a life-size hologram of John Bon Jovi that greets you and talks to you. So I could see this, like when you walk into Graceland, you're going to be able to talk to Elvis at some point. Like these kind of things I think are coming as sort of the start of it, but on the literary side.
I think the last holdouts are going to be Hollywood actors, but eventually they're going to figure out that this is going to be a way to live forever in a way, like which is kind of, I think, every actor's secret goal, and your legacy can continue. Like we're gonna get Tom Cruise movies until the end of time. That's what I think is going to happen. Mission Impossible 9 billion.
I mean, can't we just figure out how to actually live forever? Can't science just figure that out?
We'll get there.
That'd be good.
I'm working on that. I've got an array of 1980s Sound Blaster sound cards and a bunch of 9-volt batteries that are dedicated to that entire idea of living forever.
Perfect.
All right.
Technology.
I'm very hopeful for this.
Yeah. I've put them together with hot glue. All right. Saturday Books imprint with new adult focus to launch next fall at Macmillan. Saturday Books, a new imprint specializing in new adult fiction, will be launched by St. Martin's Publishing Group next fall. The imprint will publish 10 to 12 titles annually and is a sibling imprint of Wednesday Books, which focuses on young adult fiction. St. Martin's identified a growing gap in the market for books that appeal to readers who matured with YA but desire more adult themes. St. Martin's has been a pioneer in the new adult category, coining the term in 2009 and continuing to innovate in this space. New adult.
New adult. This is just interesting to me because of the way the industry moves. Like new adult was dead. It was a dirty word. You can't say it. You can't pitch anything as new adult. And now we have a whole imprint dedicated to new adult.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dust off those manuscripts I get. Your new new adult manuscripts. Here you
Or
go.
on the indie publisher side, I may just start throwing new adult in the key terms for most of my books and see if that bumps up anything. I mean,
Yeah.
forget I said
Is
that.
new adult a thing outside of like the romance? Because I know that it was very much like that college romance type of.
Yeah. I don't know.
It was in like sci-fi fantasy for a while.
Was
And then,
it?
like, for a minute, and then it was like, no, don't do that. So I don't know. I was like, well, that's interesting. Where is this coming from? But obviously enough of a want for it that you're getting an imprint.
Yeah.
So
I kind of wonder
yeah.
if it's going to shift like some of what we've traditionally thought of as YA into, because there are quote YA books that I always felt were leaning a little heavy towards the A side of that. Yeah. So I think we'll see that emerge.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yes, I agree with that. I do think I read somewhere, I don't remember if it was like a study or an article, but they were actually talking, maybe it was from like a librarian, basically saying that like a lot of the YA that comes out tends to be geared towards that, younger adult versus the teenager. And, now there's starting to be an actual gap in YA. So, that would be nice if they actually started shifting YA towards that younger or that actual teenager, the 16-year-old, 14-year-old, and then actually had like that new adult. I do think that would be a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, final story. Cutting their own checks. Authors seek help to plug their own books after cuts by publishers. Authors are investing their own money into book promotions, hiring independent planners, publicists, and marketers to augment their publishers' efforts. There's been a significant rise in demand for independent promotional services across the industry. Rates for these services have increased, with median consulting fees rising from $51 to $60 per hour in 2019 to up to $100 in 2023. The big five publishers have seen staff reductions and hiring freezes impacting their ability to provide comprehensive promotional support. Hiring independent promoters can be costly, with book tours costing around 15 grand and publicity campaigns up to 16 grand. Authors often use a significant portion of their earnings to fund these efforts. Despite the costs, many authors see this as a necessary investment to ensure the success of their books in a competitive market. Welcome to indie publishing.
Yeah, that was my first thought, because when you ask somebody like why they would want to go into the traditional model, their first or the main response I typically get is, well, I don't want to have to do any of the marketing stuff. They think that big publishers are gonna do that for them, and that this is making it very clear the big publishers aren't actually doing that. If you talk to people at the big publishers, we talked about layoffs last week and the week before that, and the week before that. They've been laying off a lot of the senior people. The youngest people on the staff tend to be in the marketing department, which is fantastic when it comes to social media, but not so much when it comes to traditional press like newspapers and magazines or television spots. They don't have the contacts or the experience. They're sending out a blast email and hoping somebody responds to it. And that's starting to come back and bite them. I mean, from what I've seen, on my side, I've been at this for, believe it or not, 10 years. It's going to be in November. When I put out a book, through a traditional publisher, I never tell them what I'm doing on the marketing side, because they'll typically give me their marketing plan, and it's always this PowerPoint presentation that you can tell they did a find replace on and just kind of swapped out the author name and book title. But like if you tell them that you're doing something, like you're going to spend X dollars on Facebook ads, the second you hang up on that phone call, somebody is going back looking at their budget saying, well, the author's handling this, we don't have to do it anymore. So you don't want to tell them anything. Authors have been doing this stuff on their own for a long time, but it's getting to the point now where it's basically required to make a book succeed. And if it gets to that point with a traditional publisher, why are you doing that for them when you could do it for yourself?
I think the biggest thing is distribution. I think that's still the missing piece for a lot of, because like I can beg all I want, but I'm going to be lucky to get my books into like one local Barnes and Noble, much less the whole network. Yeah, I'm going to want a bigger cut of royalty if I'm on the hook for marketing.
Yeah. Fair
So
enough. And I think it just highlights the dwindling resources, right? Everyone in publishing works really, really hard, but there just aren't as many PR people, marketing people as there used to be due to cuts and restructuring. So yeah, it's an issue for sure.
when you're writing a book, the first draft is the easy part. It's what comes after that hurts. The confusion, the self-doubt, questioning this, questioning that, trying to get feedback so you can feel confident making changes. It's a lot to handle. And that's why I'm delighted to say that this episode of the Writers Inc. podcast is sponsored by AutoCrit. One of the most value-packed memberships for any author, AutoCrit brings you an amazing suite of tools that can make it a breeze to plan, write, and edit your books all in one place. From start to finish, everything you need to produce a strong, confident story is at your fingertips. Get instant developmental feedback on plot, conflict, characters, themes, and more through the Story Analyzer. And edit each sentence to perfection with a complete interactive editing suite packed with reports and insights. And that's not to mention additional benefits like private community forums and live members-only support, and writing sessions every single week. It's an incredible place to be for any writer. And listeners of the Writers Inc. podcast can take advantage of lifetime AutoCrit Pro membership for one single payment. That's right, no renewal fees. Head to autocrit.com/JD to get yourself a lifetime membership now. Big thanks to AutoCrit for sponsoring the show.
All right. With that, JD, who is up this week?
This week, we've got Ace Atkins coming on. He's a New York Times bestselling author who started his career as a crime reporter in Florida. His latest novel is called Don't Let the Devil Ride and releases June 25th. It's a wild mashup of domestic suspense and international intrigue. I actually liked it a lot. Here he is, Ace Atkins.
So you have a new book coming out, your 30th book, Don't Let the Devil Ride.
Yeah, very exciting. It's been a couple years since my last book in 2021, so it's great to be able to finally talk about it. This book's been done for a while, so it's nice to actually let people know the book is coming out.
That's the way publishing goes, right? It's about 2 years behind.
It is. So again, you'll have to remind me of some of the details of the book. I'm joking about that.
No, I'll try my best. Yeah. So before we get to that, let's just start at the beginning because we're geared towards writers and they like to know, how did you get your start writing?
Well, I mean, I think the most important thing about getting started as a writer was being a reader. And it's so funny to me. It never ceases to amaze me how many people come up to me and say, I have a novel I want to write. I want to be a writer. I want to do this and that. And I'll say, well, who do you like? And they say, well, I don't read very much. And I think that's the craziest thing in the world. It's like, I want to be an athlete, but I really don't like to exercise. I don't like to run. It's just a strange thing. So I started off as a kid who loved books. I loved hanging out in libraries. I loved hanging out in used bookstores and back in the day, even paperback bookstores. I was just very much into it. That slowly led into very secretly writing in journals and trying out short stories and writing some really horrendous prose that for some reason I've kept all these years in a locked file cabinet. But I don't think I really became I wasn't a professional writer until I became a newspaper reporter. And when I got out of college, it was a very long story with that, but eventually stumbled into the world of journalism and being a newspaper reporter. And that's where I came under the tutelage of some excellent editors. And it was the best education in the world. So I owe all 30 books that I've written to some very hard-nosed editors over the years.
Huh. Yeah, you got to get that prose chopped down, right? No extra words.
Absolutely. And it wasn't like an MFA program. It wasn't a very supportive, touchy-feely, we see things that you had to get it right. You had to soak it up and you had to take criticism, and great experience.
Yeah. And for part of that, you were a crime reporter, if I have that correct. I'm not sure if that was the whole journalism.
The majority of my career was on the crime beat. And it's funny, that's the place where I always wanted to be. And I think for a lot of reporters, that's the place they want to get away from. The crime beat is somewhere where you're assigned to, but you want to get off and to write about politics or other facets or art or whatever you're into. But for me, that's where I always wanted to be. So I was always drawn to that world, and eventually got the position of being the police reporter for the Tampa Tribune. And what a terrific experience that was.
I'm sure, and I'm sure it's some good knowledge and inspiration for your books.
Definitely. But it's funny, it's strange as 20 years on and thinking about it, is I had so much story around me, but ended up writing things that were completely different than the world that I was seeing every day. So in some form, I think even though I'm seeing exciting things and seeing, homicide investigations and looking at court trials and doing prison interviews and that kind of thing, I kind of was drawn to a more of a kind of a mythical world for some reason. But again, a great education.
So escaping from crime writing by doing crime writing.
Exactly.
Crime writing.
So it's hard to explain. It was so funny because I was in the epicenter of weird crime. I mean, I am in Central Florida. I am writing about Tampa. In fact, one of my colleagues at the time was the wonderful Tim Dorsey, and Tim, great novelist. We were working together, and Tim ended up writing about Florida, and I ended up writing about my native Deep South. And so I was in Florida, but I was writing about Mississippi, and I was writing about Alabama, and I was writing about Memphis. But meanwhile, all the weird Florida man stuff was just all around me all the time. I have written one Florida novel, and maybe I'll go back to it someday.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, the Florida man memes just kind of blew up huge. So that's fun.
They're all around, all true.
Yeah. So were you still a crime reporter when your first book debuted? Is that what you were doing at the time?
I was, and I speaking as we are talking to writers and people that want to get into the business, it was a different time back then. I mean, this was the late 90s. And I spent my weekends I had a studio apartment in Tampa, and I spent the weekends working on my novel. And I would go, and that's what I did. I got up Saturday and had breakfast, and I would sit out with a pot of coffee, and I'd write until it got dark. And I'd do the same thing on Sunday. And, any spare moment that I had, I was working on a book. So the first novel I sent out got several rejections. Got 2 people that liked it but didn't buy it. And then, long story short, I did not. That's the biggest piece of advice I would give to your listeners, which is don't write a book and then just sit on it and sit on it. Go ahead and write your next book, because every book you write is really a training ground to writing a better book each time that you write. I really do believe that. So the second book I wrote, I sent it out, and I sent it to an editor who had written me a nice letter about my first book that saw some promise in it, and they bought it immediately. And I was in the newsroom. I literally got the phone call, and it was from St. Martin's Press, and the editor said, we want to make a deal on this. And I was just ecstatic. And it's been a long road since then, and there's a lot of hurdles even after you first get published. But back in those days, I think publishing maybe even meant a little bit more back then. I mean, this was before the days of e-publishing and self-publishing, and even before the Amazon and all that kind of stuff. So when you got a call from New York that they wanted to put your book in print, it was quite a phone call.
Yeah. So you got your editor before the agent? Is that how that went?
I did, but I was very smart, which is I called a very well-known, respectable agency immediately. And I said, listen, you don't have to do anything. I have a book deal lined up. All you do have to do is negotiate it. And that's the great thing about having a good agent. Within 24 hours, they had doubled the very paltry advance that I had offered. But to me, as a young struggling writer, I mean, I was only 27 years old. It was a decent little bit of pocket money to get, and I was thrilled to get it. But also, the agent was able to look after my audio rights and world rights and all those kind of things. And initially, when you try to make a deal with anybody, they're going to try to take all that stuff, and you need an agent to hammer it out.
Yeah, absolutely. So now you've been doing this at least 20 years. Do you still write on an old 40-year-old keyboard? Is that still the method of choice?
I do. I wish I would. I'd have to. Well, yeah, we're not on video, so. But yes, I do. And in fact, the damn 40-year-old keyboard. Actually, be honest with you, I saw that in print. It actually is it's only 30. But it's an old IBM heavyset keyboard that I had with my original IBM 4046, and it finally went out on me the other day, and I was so heartbroken by it. I immediately got on eBay and shopped around and paid a pretty hefty sum for a replacement because I've gotten so addicted to that large keyboard.
Yeah, hopefully that lasts another 30 years.
I
Is
hope
it more
so.
tactile, do you find, than the
Oh,
modern
definitely.
keyboards?
It feels
Yeah.
what it feels like is it feels like you're typing on like a typewriter. It's not a soft key thing. When I'm typing, people can hear it. And it's big and heavy, and it reminds me kind of the keyboards that were in the newsroom back in the day.
I love that.
Yeah.
So you've written lots of books on that. So in addition to writing your own series, you've written for the Robert B. Parker Spenser series, and you were kind of flipping back and forth between those books, publishing one and then the other with your Quinn Colson series. What was that like? Like, what is it like to go back and forth between two different series?
Well, it was a good experience. I really enjoyed it. I did it for over 10 years. I wrote 10 books that started. I was the first person that was hired by Robert Parker's family to take over this series and to start writing Spenser. And so this happened about a year after Mr. Parker passed away, and it was a very interesting thing. I was a huge fan of Robert Parker, and it led me to flying up. I live in Mississippi, and flying up to Boston and meeting Joan Parker, Bob's wife, getting to know his circle of friends. And for over a decade, I spent a hell of a lot of time in Boston. And so I got a lot of air miles going between the Memphis airport here and going up to Boston. And I had to break the news to people that I was actually from the South to write this very Boston series. So, but your question is how was that, flipping? It was hard. The difficult thing for me wasn't the production of the books. It was changing the voices. Yeah. And when I wrote Parker, I wasn't asked to do this, but it was just as a fan, this is what I thought fans would want, is I wrote the book as if Bob had written it. And I wrote it in his voice. And the Spenser books were all in first person. So it was a very distinct voice that he had. And I tried to replicate that the best that I could. But then I would go back and write the Quinn Colson books that are set in North Mississippi and set in Memphis with very Southern characters and very true to the people who are outside my window. And then sometimes the Quinn books would start, people would have kind of a Boston accent or, saying stuff. So, something being wicked or, or whatever. And I'd have, so it'd seep into the writing and vice versa. So there was always I'd say about 3 weeks to a month that I had to hammer out that voice to get my natural voice back, or then to, get back into Bob's voice.
Yeah, voice is always tricky and so hard to nail down.
And it's hard. I think that's the hardest thing for people to really get a hold of, because voice is everything in writing. Anyone, I always say this when I give, writer talks, is, anybody off the street can make people talk and walk on the page. That's not an art. That's not writing, but crafting a voice and developing a voice is what's difficult. And switching between, I could have easily, I think, gone from one book to another. Say like Don't Let the Devil Ride, my new book is the same voice that I essentially that I've been writing for years, but writing as a different author is a bit tricky.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And capturing someone else's voice. I imagine that took a bit.
It did. It was a lot of fun. It was a nice challenge.
Yeah. So with your new book, Don't Let the Devil Ride, that's a standalone novel, correct?
It is.
So far.
So far. We'll see how it sells. If it sells a lot, then it's a series.
Okay. That's the way it works. I like that.
That's the way, 100%.
So you've talked a bit online about how crime is more immediate in a place where everybody knows each other.
Well, I think I probably was talking about that in a place where everybody knows each other, more like the books I had been writing previous to this. The novels were all set in a fictional county here in North Mississippi. not, completely different from where I live or counties near me. And it was interesting to write a crime book where everybody was interrelated and where people did know each other, and there were family connections and historical connections and all that, and very much inspired by, not to be highfalutin about it, but I certainly live here in Oxford, Mississippi, so influenced by the world of William Faulkner, who also wrote many mysteries himself and was a mystery and crime novel fan. But I don't know. I don't think in Don't Let the Devil Ride that necessarily holds true. And I think that's what this book was about, is kind of writing it a bit on a larger setting, a larger canvas for me to get into. Memphis is not necessarily a world where everybody knows each other. I think Memphis is a town where it is very sectionalized, and it's rich and poor and black and white and different people from different neighborhoods. And if you're from North Memphis, you're not connected to people in South Memphis. And it's, old money and old connections and a lot of family histories. And so it was a bit different. I think that's what was kind of intriguing about that world to write about.
Yeah, and you did some overseas locations and all kinds of things in that book, which...
Well, I think, I had been writing so long about this fictional place called Tibahaw County, and I've been writing about this world, and, occasionally there would be scenes that would be set where we live is very close to Memphis. I mean, it's like, Memphis is like, if you live outside Atlanta, you may live in Marietta, but you're going to go to downtown Atlanta. Here, living in North Mississippi, you're in Memphis all the time. So that's where I fly out of. That's my town. But when I was writing this, I thought, what the hell, let's really expand the, landscape. I've been to, fortunately over the years, publishing has brought me to France many times. My books have been published in France. I've spent a lot of time in Paris. And I said, well, what the hell, let's do some scenes in Paris and let's have some fun with this and make it. And really it was kind of also breaking down some walls and some genres that I really love, which is, crime fiction and thrillers and spy novels and international intrigue. And it was kind of, a mashup of doing whatever the hell I wanted to. And I think that had been building for quite some time.
Yeah. And I also noticed that in this book and previous novels, you love to incorporate music and musicians. And what do you love about doing that in your writing?
I think it's a really good question. I think that it goes back to voice. And I think I learned so much about voice and writing from musicians. And I really learned so much about, I found things very stylistically similar between blues artists, people like Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, and going back to Robert Johnson, and reading Raymond Chandler and reading Dashiell Hammett. There was a simplicity and an exactness to the writing, and I learned so much from that. I think getting into the feel of a book, I have to have a soundtrack, and that book, I think, has to have a certain emotional quality to this, to what I'm trying to create. And for Memphis, there was no shortage of inspiration. There's a great documentary that's being run on HBO right now about Stax Records, about the rise and fall of the legendary Memphis studio that brought people like, Otis Redding and Booker T and MGs out to the world. And so that, I can just listen to some Stax Records and it gets me into the mood of Porter Hayes. It gets me in the mood of Memphis. You put on something like Green Onions, and that's just a soundtrack to it. In fact, we're working right now. What I'm really excited is it's already in development for a TV show, and so the writer who's working on the TV show is fortunately a terrific music scholar, and we can kind of shorthand things and talk about different bits and pieces of music that we want to use, and it just gives you the mood and gets you in that right Memphis frame of mind.
Nice. And so I can't recall it. Have you had other things that have gone to film, TV production before?
I had one of the Spenser books that I wrote called Wonderland was made into a movie with Mark Wahlberg called Spenser Confidential. The less said about that, probably the better. No comment on what actually ended up on the screen, but that was an adaptation. It was an adaptation of one of my books. The Quinn Colson books had been in development or were in development for quite some time at HBO. And we were getting so close, and I was so excited. Had a wonderful writer and everything write around the beginning of 2020, and the pandemic.
Oh, lovely pandemic.
Yeah, was not good for getting anything made.
No.
And right now they're very excited. A new crop of people working on them. The rights are over at A&E right now, so fingers crossed something will happen there.
Nice. Yeah, it's always amazing when something gets developed. And I think what you said there too about the Spenser adaptation, I think a lot of writers don't maybe realize that they're buying kind of the characters in the world, but not necessarily the story, and they can do kind of whatever they want. Is that kind
Well,
of
I had this conversation about when we were there was a number of studios that wanted to take on Don't Let the Devil Ride, and we were very excited about it. And I said to the wonderful agent who was taking it out, I said, I really, the most important thing to me truly is that it gets made in a high quality way, and that the characters and the story remain intact, and that there is a good adaptation. And there was kind of a pause and silence on the phone during the conversation. And what it comes down to is once you sign over that, that book, then it's somebody else's property, and it's somebody else's vision. And sometimes they get it right, and sometimes they make it better, and sometimes they make it worse. But at some point, you're kind of taken out of the equation.
Yeah, you just kind of have to let it go and tell yourself it's a different writer, different medium, and it's going to be what it's going to be.
That's it. There's, of course, a famous story I'm sure many of your listeners know with James M. Cain, where a reporter said, "Mr. Cain, what do you think about what Hollywood has done to your stories?" And he looked back and he pointed to his bookshelf and he said, "Hollywood hasn't done anything to my stories. They're right here on my shelf." And I think that's what you have to separate.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So are you still writing 2 books a year? I know you were doing that for quite a bit. Is that still your plan?
That isn't. I think that was an intense exercise that I welcomed and I enjoyed and have no regrets about doing. I think that, I did not want to give up my own series to write the Spenser books, but at the same time, I did not want to pass up the opportunity of carrying on the legacy of one of my favorite writers.
Yeah.
But there's only so long you can do that. It is a pretty intense schedule. There's not a lot of days off. There's not a lot of vacation. There's not a lot of time to sit and reflect about what you want to do next. And so that's really where this has come in is, I am definitely more of a one book a year guy. That seems like a luxury to me. And so this is the first of that new venture. And then being able to write over the last 10 years, writing mainly, series for, the same series, to branch out and to create new characters, create new worlds. And Porter Hayes, one of the characters, not the only character, certainly, and Don't Let the Devil Ride, is somebody I've been wanting to write for more than a decade. And unless I hopped off the merry-go-round and kind of looked around and took on a new challenge, it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, and he was a joy to read. I'm just curious, what made you say, "I'm going to make him 70"?
Well, that's another good question. Why was it? I love the Shaft movies, and I love Richard Roundtree, and I think he was just phenomenal. And I know that when they tried to remake those a few years ago, they had Samuel L. Jackson, who wasn't a hell of a lot younger than Richard Roundtree. But anyway, they tried to, youth him up and make him a younger character. And then occasionally you'd see Richard Roundtree would pop up on there and make a cameo or something. I said, why didn't they just make an older Shaft? Why not? Why isn't Shaft? I'd love to see an older Shaft, And so that's kind of how, and also I had been kind of sketching out stories for Porter Hayes that had taken place in the 70s. I have half of a novel with him from the 1990s. So he has a definite timeline in my mind about his age. And that was one of the reasons why this book is set in 2010, because he was of the age to still, be hopping around and doing things and taking care of business. But I like the idea. I like the idea of and that's something, going back to what we're talking about with Spenser, that's something that Bob Parker really never allowed his character to do, which was get older. And to me, that makes them, I think, more endearing, more interesting than just a Teflon coated tough guy who, beats up everybody and doesn't have any aches and pains and is not going on. I like the idea of a more of an advanced, character to follow.
Yeah, and it definitely wasn't during the aches and pains, and when he goes in and talks to the young kids, and they're not giving him any respect, he's like, "I knew your mom."
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, that's
"Let's
right.
go."
Well, I think it's interesting, especially with somebody who's an investigator, that they have an institutional knowledge of a city, and somebody like Porter Hayes, who was had been a cop going back to the MLK assassination in '68, knows that city like no one else. And so that's the perfect guide for me as somebody who's been around, and it's certainly based on, Porter Hayes has always been just absolutely ingrained in my mind, and somebody I've been wanting to write, and it really just comes out of the history of Memphis.
Yeah, and I think that's important, for writers to think about too, about the history of the character, before they step on the page. And
Well, it is, and certainly, and you guys know this. I'm sure this is kind of something common knowledge you talk about, but it's not something that I know. I know a lot about Porter Hayes, and I've written about Porter Hayes. I have written on projects that may go somewhere or may not go somewhere, but I really have a deep, deep background with him, but I don't put it all on the page.
Yeah.
That's the famous iceberg theory. And you as the writer need to know as much as you possibly can. However, you do not have to put that all down on the page. It's all going to come out if you have, one of the worst traits, I think, when I read books, that I really hate is the biography page, where, you meet, John Smith, and for the next page, we read about where he's born and where he came in and how he was raised. And we don't know about that. I don't give a damn about that stuff. I only care about who they are as a person and how they talk and how they act. That's the most important thing. The biography stuff is resume.
Yeah, I feel like that a lot is for the author who's getting to know their character, and I'm like, "Okay, you can take that off the page now." Your reader doesn't need
Exactly.
to read
I
that.
mean, put it in your digital file. We don't need to know that stuff.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot. People that I've known for years, and people that I know very, very well, and I can finish their sentences, but I don't necessarily know very much about their parents, and sometimes I might even forget, where'd they go to high school, or I can't even remember that detail, but I know them very well as a person. I know what kind of person they are, and I know what kind of character they are.
Right, but those kind of rote factual details aren't important to the character
No,
as
not
much
to
as
me
the
anyway.
character itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I know your fans are gonna wanna know, is there going to be another Quinn Colson book? Is that something you can talk about?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't spend a decade of my life without returning to Quinn Colson. I think it was, those books are so much fun to write, and they're not standalone adventures. There are books that are intertwined. There are stories. And that was the other thing about writing about a county that changes and grows. And, there are characters that we meet in the first book that get older and they pass away, and new people come to town. And then there's family histories and things that happened 50 years ago. So I have quite a file of things that are off the page that are all connected, to the family history and the overall history of Jericho, Mississippi, and to Tippecanoe County. Yes, I've got some great ideas that have been stacking up. So I hope to jump into that soon.
Nice. I know a lot of people are gonna be happy to hear that, so
I hope so. I hope so.
awesome. Okay, and just as we're wrapping up, you've been doing this for a while, so I'd love to ask you, kinda looking back, if you could give a piece of advice to newer or aspiring authors, what would you tell them?
Well, I think it goes back to, again, to repeat myself, is read, read, read. I mean, read everything that you can. Read in your genre, read outside your genre, read people that inspire you. Just always have a book going. And if you're not into books, and if you're not crazy about books, then don't enter this realm, because it's an obsession that you have to get your stories out there, and it's something that you have to learn by watching. And then the other thing is learn by doing. And that means that you have to be committed to doing a hell of a lot of writing. And, again, I meet people all the time that'll say, "Hey, I've written this 100 words. Can you read this?" can I get a book deal on it? And I think, well, no, that's not how this works, and it's not something you just sit down and have people talk and walk. And then, you think it, the best writers make it look easy. And those writers have just, been practicing so much like a musician that they make it look effortless. But the two things of the reading and writing go hand in hand. And every time you write and every time you work on a manuscript, every time you sit down and write a page, or every time you throw away a page, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I started a book in the fall, and I got into it. I was about 100 pages into it, and I like the characters, and I like the setting. I like even what was happening, but it was the wrong entry point. And there was nothing wrong with it. I could say, structurally or story-wise or anything. I can just boil it down to just a sense of, this is not, I got a better point that we need to enter this. And I trashed it. And, I went back, and it was hard to do. I trashed about 60 pages. But you have to be willing to do that. And a good friend of mine, wonderful writer, one of my good friends, Tim Green, who's just writes young adult books, but he also has written thrillers and wonderful. And he said, you don't lose any of that stuff when you trash it. You still wrote it, and you still got the practice out of it. And if you're continuing on the story, you still are going to carry over some of those things that you've learned. So it's just, it's a commitment, and it's not easy. It's not that's one thing I'll say also, it's an easy task. Again, one of my pet peeves when I meet people and they say, what do you do? And I say, I'm a novelist. And, nothing really makes me angrier when somebody goes, oh, well, boy, that's an easy job. You sit around and make things up. And I, kind of want to punch people like that, because it's frustrating, and it is a lot of work, and you never really take time off. I think every novelist, working novelist, or people that want to write, are constantly working, and it may come at 12 o'clock at night, or it may come first thing in the morning. But, you just have to be committed for the duration and committed for the long haul.
Okay. So what I loved about this was escaping from crime reporting by writing about crime. So I'm curious, is there ever something that you just wanted to escape from in the real world, so you wrote about it in a totally different way?
Mayan death gods.
Mayan death gods.
Yeah. Plague of my existence. Yeah.
A vampire in a convenience store.
I've honestly always wanted to be a crime reporter. That always comes across as the coolest job in TV and movies. And, but now in today's world, it's probably near impossible to make a living at something like that. I think the heyday was probably 70s to the 90s or so.
I thought it was interesting. He said nobody ever wants to work the crime beat, because like you said, I thought that would be fascinating.
It may depend on your in-game goal here, if your goal is I want to write crime novels, you're going to be all over that. But if you want, just a normal life that's free of waking up in the middle of the night screaming over what you saw, that's
it's probably one of those things that's great on paper, and then you actually get out there and you have to smell that body, or you see that you can't get that out of your head, and
I suppose you do see a much darker side of humanity when you work that beat.
We call that secondary trauma.
Secondary trauma.
But JD, you wrote about finance though, right? In one of your books. And
I did, but because I needed to explain some stuff, and it just seemed like an easy way to go there and just pull, because I didn't have to research anything. I've never written a book. I've worked with plenty of crime reporters. I've worked at newspapers and magazines, and I've been around those people back in the day. So back in the 90s. But I've never actually written about it. I feel like it's something I'm missing out on. I might have to write a book about a crime reporter now, just because of this.
There you go.
I think you're going to open a door. You're going to regret it. Once you've looked through, you can't close that door again. That's
boy.
Be warned.
I think that's true. Okay. I love this keyboard thing, which is something we don't talk about a lot, is actually the mechanics of writing. Does it matter to you how tactile your keyboard is?
Yes.
No.
Dear God, yes, it does. Yes.
Really?
My wife still has one of the My wife still has one of the older Macs where you can change out like our hard drive or a memory. Like you can open it up and actually work on it. And it still has that original Apple mechanical keyboard. And like the movement of those keys just feels perfect when you're typing. I've got a brand new MacBook, and like my fingers actually hurt, sometimes after I finish up the writing day. Cause like it's just the tactile feel just isn't there. And honestly, there's something about that clunky sound, I think, from a big chunky keyboard too, or using a typewriter. Yeah. Like there's something satisfying about that.
Yeah. Nice feedback.
Man, I love a new keyboard. Like I like a nice, quiet, elegant, smooth keyboard that doesn't make a lot of noise.
No, I came up writing on typewriters, and granted, electric typewriters, not necessarily the old clunky ones, although I've done some stuff on that. But like that I like that sound. Like my current keyboard is a Keychron K3. It's a mechanical keyboard. It's got, Brown switches, which if you are getting nerdy about keyboards, there's a whole color series of switches you can get into. But like this thing is perfect. It's like the perfect keyboard. But I say that I've probably worn out a million keyboards in my career, and worn them out, like keys worn through, things like that. But my favorites have been keyboards just like this one. It's a Bluetooth. It's compact size, but it's it's still got the full size. It got nice range. It's awesome. I love keyboards. I have a vast collection of keyboards.
Fascinating.
Behind me, if no one's watching video, but like there's a little table behind me. There's a typewriter style keyboard on that table that I use with my iPad. And I like to go out in public. That thing itself is very loud, but when I like to go out in public and I use an app called Hanks Writer, which was made by Tom Hanks, and it makes typewriter noises, including the carriage return ding and all that stuff. And I'll crank that thing up to full in the middle of Starbucks and just,
Oh my God.
I'm a spectacle.
I hate noise. I don't like noise.
Oh my goodness. I'm not judging your personality based on that at all, Kevin.
I like to pretend I'm one of those like Pulp Fiction era writers, man. If I don't smoke, I used to smoke cigars, but I can't really justify that anymore. But like, I want my glass of whiskey and my cigar and I like that whole feeling. That's the vibe I write in.
Do you own a fedora?
I like the aesthetic. I don't like the noise.
It's almost within reach, but I have behind the bedroom door in this office is a hook with a fedora on it. I do own a fedora. I am that pretentious. I am completely pretentious. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. You know what else I found really interesting is that Ace was alternating books in different series with different voices for 10 years. I think not by choice, just not an opportunity you could pass up. But would that like appeal to you? Do you think you would do that for the right opportunity?
Yeah.
I would. I have.
I do that now.
Yeah.
I mean, you nailed it. I mean, switching between the voices is the tricky part. When I started, like right now, when I write, I start by reading whatever I wrote the previous day and editing that, which usually takes about a half hour or so. But that tends to put me and my voice and everything back into whatever current space I need to be in for what I'm working on. So making that switch between voices is a little bit easier. But I can see what he was talking about as far as accents creeping in, from one to the other. The hardest time I ever had with that is when I wrote Dracul, because that's Victorian English, and then I was writing one of the Forum K books at the same time. So I had to jump into modern day Chicago. That was pretty drastic.
Would that make it easier? I don't know. Somewhere in my brain, it feels like the more different they are, the easier it would be. But I don't know if that's true.
I don't know. But, it was interesting to me that he said when he took on the book that the estate did not ask him to write in the Robert B. Parker voice, and he just decided to do that. And I was like, that's interesting. I don't know if I took over a well-known series, would I want to replicate that voice? How important is that to fans? I would think it would have to be.
Yeah, that's the way I feel about it. Like I feel like I'd be obliged to, even if they didn't expect it. I feel like I'd be doing it a disservice if I didn't try to do that. Because that's what that voice is what readers fall in love with. And if they're coming in expecting, like, this is one of the reasons why I rarely read the books that are written by, after an author has died, the books that get written by ghostwriters or whatever, like I rarely read and enjoy them because they're missing that element. And it becomes really noticeable in a strange, unnoticeable way. Like I don't know why I'm noticing that it's not the same voice sometimes. It just feels different from the jump, from like page
We've
1.
had Andrew Child on a couple of times, and he's talked about taking over the Reacher series from his brother. And if you read, especially on the first book that they did together, all the reviews, like any negative review was always about the change in voice.
Yeah.
And he tried, he tried to mimic his brother, and they're brothers, so they were pretty close to begin with. But you can't get it exact.
I mean, I think even when you have like, authors who do like a really popular trilogy or a series, and then they write something new, and there's not even an expectation that that's going to be the same or similar. And usually readers are like, whoa, what is this? They carry an expectation, whether they are conscious of it or not. So
it's like Jim Rollins flipping to fantasy, and I enjoy both, but it's like reading two different authors. Like it's just not the same. If I were going into that expecting like this is going to be another Jim book, I would be very disappointed because it doesn't sound the same. But I've enjoyed it. As long as I can get my brain away from who's writing it, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So you agree with Ace then that voice is everything in writing?
I do. Yeah.
Yes.
Characters are the heart of everything, but the voice, the narrator is a character. They're sort of the ghost character, the witness that we're being allowed to tag along with. And so if you don't put the energy into crafting that character the same way you did all the protagonists and the antagonists and the side characters, you'll find that the book doesn't get those positive reviews from people. It doesn't get, it doesn't become beloved. That's what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think voice is like if you compare it to a movie, it's like in a book, you don't have like the cinematography, you don't have the soundtrack, you don't have like all of those subtle elements, the lighting, the frames, you don't have any of that. So the voice sort of does that work, I think, at least to me.
I like that as a
when
parallel.
I think about voice.
The implication of that is that all that stuff that creates atmosphere in a movie is the movie's voice, which
all the rain in 7.
All the rain in 7.
Well, it is, because that's kind of what, like, it's unspoken and it's not like obnoxious, but like it's definitely there and it gives the movie like a vibe, right? And that's kind of what voice does to a book. I mean, it's not just where the book is or who's in the book or what's happening. Like there's like a vibe to it.
Imagine if you took 7 and set it in LA, like in the sunshine.
Same right. It wouldn't work at all. No. Yeah. But also, Kevin, you said characters are the other thing. And he brought out something that I don't think we've talked about before, is letting your characters in a series age.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Should you let your characters age?
I didn't realize I was doing it, but yes. I didn't realize I was doing it until I released this latest Kotler book, because it started to catch on that, the last one I released was like 4 years ago, full length. The last full length book was like 4 years ago. And the character in the interim, there's like a weird, I guess, maturity in a sense that happened. And it's because it's the same sorts of things happening. Because like in the interim between those two books, there were pandemics and other events in my life that changed my perspective. And suddenly I was relaying that on the page. So it just sort of happened naturally.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing it in 4MK, but I really don't have a choice because I'm bouncing around in time so much. Like that, the age is actually a tool for me as the author to be able to tell the story the way that I want to tell it. The Reacher books, again, I guess are another example of, where I think Lee, to a certain extent, didn't comment on age a whole lot. Like he either had Reacher in present day or he had him back in the army. The latest books, though, they've touched on it, and I'm pretty sure they had Reacher's age in one of the more recent books. And I don't recall what that number was, but I do remember it startled me when I ran into it. Like he was a lot older than because I always picture Reacher as being, like maybe 30 something, just like the TV show. Yeah. But it was something like 40s or 50s or something like that.
It was 40s. I think it was late 40s or something.
Yeah. So that threw me a little bit. But yeah, I mean, for character growth, I think age is important.
It's kind of interesting. how it works, because like you have a character like James Bond who is like timelessly a certain age, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, the movies have done that through various things, and I can't think of like a specific example, but I know I've read series where it's like no matter what's happening, like that character just sort of like stays within a certain range,
Yeah.
age wise. But sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes that does get old because you do kind of want like
Yeah.
growth. So I guess it sort of depends on what kind of things you have them experiencing too. Like, you know.
Yeah.
I would go see Geriatric Bond. I would sign up for that
Would you
movie. I
though?
would go see
Okay.
it. It would be interesting.
Did you enjoy Geriatric Indiana Jones?
Okay, let's not go
Right.
there.
So that's what I'm saying. It's like we like to think that, and I find it interesting because until I'd say Crystal Skull, but until then, that franchise really didn't. He didn't age in the franchise, even though he
Yeah.
Right,
was
yeah.
clearly aging in real life. Like Indiana Jones, the character was still Indy, still running around dodging bullets and cracking whips and what have you. And we didn't start to see the impact of age on the character until it was unavoidable with the actor.
And now we have AI, so we
now
never
we
have
have
to have
AI,
that
which-
happen again.
And that's what I'm saying. Once I think the actors are going to be the last holdouts on that, but eventually we're going to have an Indiana Jones movie with a fresh-faced Harrison Ford.
It kind of
Perfect.
makes you wonder, like, why other franchises haven't sort of gone the route of Bond, you know? Because I mean,
Right.
it's sort of James Bond is James Bond, no matter who's playing him, and it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it would necessarily be easy because some characters, you know, yeah, I don't know if you could do that with Indiana Jones. But if you had the right script and put it in the right setting, I don't know. I think that you might be able to.
I don't think any of those are completely sacred. I mean, look at Star Trek. They've recast the character of Kirk at least 3 times now.
Right, yeah.
So, I think that could still happen. I think there's shows like, Doctor Who built
Doctor
that
Who.
into the show.
Yeah.
They were smart.
Right,
I can't
yeah.
talk about how smart the longevity of Doctor Who
Yeah.
is. Any story, any character, and
Yeah.
it all works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it definitely, I think sometimes we limit ourselves by thinking about that.
They did it with Han Solo. So it's not like you can't say that you can't replace Harrison Ford. I mean, they did recast Han Solo in
Right.
in that
Well,
movie.
I
Didn't
vaguely
do
remember
well.
Harrison Ford actually telling people that he's Indiana Jones, like when they actually tried to do that. I think
Yeah.
it might have been after Crystal
Well,
Skull. He
yeah.
basically completely nixed the entire idea of somebody else stepping in and playing that character. I mean, they've done young
Right.
Indiana
Yeah.
Jones, where they go really far back.
Mhm.
That's true.
And I've also heard a rumor, like if there's a scene in the new movie where Harrison, right after they have this grand opening where Harrison Ford, somehow they age him down to, what we're used to seeing. And then they show him at his current age and he's leaning out a window and he doesn't have a shirt on. And I've heard they actually
Yeah.
CGI'd that to make him look older than he actually does because they wanted to have a huge contrast between the two characters. So that's either a true rumor or it was just an excuse for Harrison Ford not to work out before the shirtless scene.
Yeah.
Like at a certain point, though, because I do remember, what was that one, that Netflix movie where they de-aged Robert De Niro and Al Pacino? Do you remember that one?
No.
And like their faces looked young, but the way they moved was like their
Yeah.
bodies did not move like
They're getting better
a
at that.
30-year-old.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that technology is getting better. So I'm sure we'll see it. But in books, we don't
Nice.
have to worry about any of that. So
No.
Right. Yeah. You can make them
neener,
older
neener,
and
neener.
younger.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, JD, who is up next week?
Next week, we've got Snowden Wright coming on. Snowden has a BA from Dartmouth and previously worked for Salon Magazine, Esquire, The Atlantic, New York Daily News. His latest novel is called The Queen City Detective Agency, and it releases August 13th. Snowden Wright.
Sounds great. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now. We'll see you next episode and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.